Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful creepy human being you, and welcome to today's true crime episode. I am so happy that you are here. I'm so happy that somehow in all of this that we're forced to deal with on the day today you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or Bratterstein, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing the horrible murder of Gail Peck at the hands of her only child, Brian Peck. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing the bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. Now, before we get into the details of today's case, I first need to say a big thank you to the sponsor of today's video, and that is Aura. Now, before we even go anywhere, before we go any further, I want to ask you a question, okay? I want to start this off with a question. And the question is this: have you ever Googled yourself or somebody you love and been surprised to see how much of yours or their personal information was on one of those public listing sites? Because when I tell you, it is far more common for your personal information to get out there, because a lot of you know I was a paralegal for almost a decade and we have to serve people, and it is really easy to find people's information online, and that is because there are these people, these companies out there called data brokers, right? And they make money off of selling your personal information to people you really do not want to have it, like spammers and robocallers, okay? They can even find out where you live. I am not down with that sickness. I value my privacy and I value your privacy, and that is why I want to introduce you to Aura. Now, I have good news for you and bad news for you. Good news. Did you know data brokers are legally required to remove your information if you ask them to? Sounds great, but here comes the bad news. They make it super difficult for you to do that. First, you have to do the hardest part, which is finding out which of the data brokers have your information, and that's where Aura comes in. They figure out which of those pesky data brokers are exposing your information out there, and they submit opt-out requests on your behalf. They do the work so that you do not have to. When I first signed up for Aura, the very first thing I did is I went to the data broker opt-out section. Because I was just curious, I was like, how many of these data brokers could really have my information? And it turns out like 30, and Aura had already submitted opt-out requests on my behalf. Thank you, Aura. And that's not the only things they do. They also see if your information has been leaked on the dark web. And if you have ever experienced this, you know nobody wants their information leaked on the dark web. And they check to see if your passwords that you use for things online, like, I don't know, your banking, are secure. So these are very important things that just help you in your day-to-day life. And those are just a couple of things that Aura does to help keep you safe online from online threats that you just simply cannot see. Through just the Aura app, which is super easy to set up, by the way, you can get things like parental controls, antivirus, VPN, password management, identity theft insurance, and more. And you get it all in one place. No need for several, apps for each of these things. And most importantly, you get it all at one affordable price. It sounds great to me, and listen, I'm not your mom and I can't tell you what to do, but what I can say is I don't want people to exploit and profit off of your personal information, and you don't have to let that happen. You can let Aura do the hard work for you by helping keep you safe online. And of course, I have great news for you today. Aura is offering members of the Brat Pack the opportunity to explore all they have to offer for free for 2 weeks through my link. So if all of that sounds as good to you as it does to me, make sure to go to aura.com/Bratterstein to let them know I'm the one that sent you, and get your 14-day free trial and see if your personal information is being leaked online. And if it is, let Aura help you put a stop to it today. Now, I just want to say a big thank you to Aura for sponsoring today's video. It's sponsors like Aura that make it possible for me to put out videos as consistently as I do for you. And a big thank you to you guys, of course, as always, for always being so supportive of all of my sponsors. You rock, don't ever change. Alright, with all that said, let's go ahead and get into this video. Now, this video is on a case that inadvertently fell into my lap. It presented itself to me out of nowhere. It's a case I had never heard of before. And basically the way it happened is, I think most of us here know that there was recently a docuseries that exposed or highlighted the dark side of children working in TV called Quiet on the Set, right? So with that, the name Brian Peck got thrown into the spotlight, and that people are talking about him a lot, right? So basically what happened is that there was a post, I believe, on Twitter where somebody was posting about Quiet on the Set, and in doing so they included a photo of Brian Peck, or who they believed to be the Brian Peck that everybody had been talking about. But then they posted a revision, basically saying like, hey, the guy we posted a photo of was the wrong Brian Peck. The guy we posted a photo of was a man named Brian Peck who viciously murdered his mother, dismembered her, and then tried to pretend like nothing happened. And that's the Brian Peck that you and I, just the two of us, are going to be discussing today. Because, I saw that post on Twitter and I was like, oh, paint me intrigued, I need to know all about this, and now I do. So today I'm going to tell you that entire story. I read all the things that you do not have to, and at the end of this video I want to ask you the question of the day. I'm going to give it to you now so you can have it kicking around in your brain as we go through the details of this case, but of course I want you to answer once you have something to go on. But the question of the day is this. What do you think was the actual cause? Like, what was the cause of the fight that led to Brian Peck murdering his mother? Because he's given some conflicting statements, and I just want to know what you think is the real reason that he did what he did. So let me know all your thoughts in the comments below after we go through the details of this case. Now, with all of that said, come gather around and let me tell you the story of the horrible murder of Gail Peck at the hands of her only child, Brian Peck. Now, I want to start this video off with a quote right off the bat, and it's a quote from one of Gail's friends that I think gives you a good idea of what we're going to be discussing throughout this video today. Her friend said of this murder, and I quote, "How can you value your mother so cheaply? She did not get the honor she deserves because she's buried in pieces, and parts of her are still missing." Our story today begins on October 27th, 2017, and it begins, like many of our cases do, with a 911 call. It's just after 3:30 p.m. when a 55-year-old man named Brian Peck called the police to report that his mother was missing. The Elgin police took this report, and Brian told them that he had not seen his mother, 76-year-old Gail Peck, since that afternoon when she left to go on a walk with her dog. Well, one of her dogs. She had a couple of dogs. And after some time, the dog came back, but his mother did not, which is never a good sign. But as police looked further into this story, as they searched the home that Gail and her son Brian shared, and as they looked into what Brian had been doing in the days leading up to him reporting his mother missing, they started to believe that it was far more likely that something really terrible had happened to Gail. Not that she was missing, that she may be dead. Then this was confirmed for them just the day after the missing persons report was filed, because some fishermen had been doing what fishermen do, I guess fishing, right? And they discovered a duffel bag in a lagoon. And when they opened this duffel bag, they found that it contained body parts. It contained a torso and pieces of 2 legs of a white woman. And it turned out that these body parts belonged to Gail Peck. Now, let's backtrack a little bit. Let me tell you what I was able to find out about Gail, because this was a smaller case, so there isn't quite as much information out there as I wish I could tell you, because, I like to give you a full picture of who these victims were, not just in their death, but also in their life. And I'll tell you what I was able to find out about Brian, etc., and then we'll get into what happened here. So, Gail Peck. She was born in 1941, and she reportedly graduated from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign in 1962, then went on, at least for a time, to work at Mid-America Bank. She had 1 child, Brian, a sister, a brother, a niece named Lisa, who often looked after her and that she just adored. She was a breast cancer survivor who loved art, music, dining with friends, theater. She would often go to the Drury Lane Theater in Oakbrook Terrace and cheer "Bravo" as the curtain came down. She was said to be smart and funny, a good friend, and a nice person. She was said to be beautiful, graceful, charming, full of smiles, devotion, and love. Gail was said to be a gracious hostess that just had a way of making you feel at ease around her. One of her friends, they weren't friends very long, unfortunately, because they weren't given that chance. Her name was Sherry. She met Gail in 2017, which was the year she was killed, and this is when Brian and his mother Gail moved to Elgin and moved to a house that was just like 2 miles from Sherry's house, and the two bonded. And when Sherry's own mother passed away, unfortunately, Gail became kind of like a surrogate mother to her. She said that Gail was sassy, sweet, and intelligent with an infectious laugh and a quick wit. And she said of Gail, quote, "She liked to share in a celebration even if there was no occasion." Which sounds like she just had like a zest for being alive, which makes the whole situation so, it's already sad, but like, it's so sad. That's the that on that. It's fucking sad, man. She loved to travel, posting that she had traveled to Yugoslavia, France, Greece, Portugal, and Italy. And it looks like she went on like 1 big trip a year. She loved dogs, specifically Keeshawns, the type of dog she and Brian had, because Brian, her only son, lived with her, staying in her basement. Like the basement of her home, that's where he lived. Now, speaking of Brian, there isn't a ton of information on him out there either, because again, this case didn't get a lot of attention, which is surprising to me because it is so horrible, but I mean, horrible things like this happen every day, so the media just picks and chooses. But I was actually able to find Brian's Facebook page. And on his Facebook page, it says that he was single and listed his employment as chairman of the board or CEO of Peck Aerospace Industries, a mid-continental credit collection Inc., which I believe is his business based on like context clues of all the stuff I read, and also Peck is in the name. So it's safe to say it was his. He was either smart or considered himself to be smart based on some claims that he made later in trial and, having his own business. He said that he was an inventor of sorts. He said he was a bit of a scientist himself, right? Or so he says. He also loved dogs, specifically the dogs that him and his mom shared. On his Facebook page, he had posted a photo of all 3 of his dogs where he said, quote, "My doggy daughters, Doris, Rosie, Lulu. I will love them forever and beyond infinity." Which is just such a shame, because I feel like dog owners, I want to trust dog owners. I want to trust people who love their dogs, because I get it, but also he is a piece of shit, man. He sucks. He's not a good person, to say the least. He also, as I said, lived with his mother. He had moved into her home and was living in her basement, and by his account, he was his mother's caregiver. He said she was just kind of getting older, and years prior she had also broken her arm and had surgery on her arm, so he was just kind of there making sure she wasn't by herself, making sure somebody was always there to help take care of her. He said he had taken over paying all of her bills and was just being on paper, to read about, a good son. So why did he kill her? So let's go back to that 911 call. It's the afternoon of October 27th, 2017 when he calls 911. He tells them that his mother left their home that was located on the 700 block of Littleton Trail to walk her dog and never returned. So with that report, a search went into full effect. You don't always see missing persons cases taken seriously, but I feel like this just might be what I'm thinking, but I feel like when it's an older person, because Gail was 76 years old, there is more urgency, because it's something could have happened to her. There were officers in vehicles, regular and all-terrain. They were out there on foot, by helicopter. There was a drone, and many local residents even came out and helped look for Gail because, again, she was 76 years old, and they were out there looking for a tiny little 5-foot white woman with black hair and hazel eyes. The search was in full effect until Saturday, and what happened was, on Saturday at about 11 a.m., fishermen were doing their job, doing fisherman type things in the lagoon that was located at the 2200 block of North Stockton Drive in the in the city's Lincoln Park neighborhood, and they discovered a duffel bag in the water. When they opened this duffel bag, they found that it was filled with body parts. There was the torso and the legs, pieces of 2 different legs of a white woman, and inside the bag there was also a handsaw. Obviously, police were dispatched to the scene and more searches began, water searches began, and it didn't take long for a second duffel bag to be found by the CPD Marine Unit. And this bag also held human remains. And then, days later, as if that's not enough, then days later, about 30 feet away, more remains were found inside a suitcase in Lake Michigan near Montrose Harbor under about 10 to 12 feet of water. Now, they were pretty certain right away, and it was eventually, shortly thereafter, confirmed that these body parts all belong to the same person. Because obviously it seems what are the odds that it's not? But you know what? Crazier things have happened. And police were combing through missing person reports with the Chicago Police Superintendent, I believe was his title. His name was Eddie Johnson, saying of the investigation, quote, "Right now, detectives are combing through missing persons report, and we can confirm it is an adult, but the medical examiner is leading that investigation, so we'll wait until they come up with their conclusions." But right away, police in Elgin were speaking with police in Chicago to see if it was possible that the body parts could belong to one of their missing residents, because it seemed pretty clear that this was Gail, that they believed this was Gail. They even released a statement saying that they were talking to Brian and working with Chicago police. Elgin police released a statement saying that they were talking to Brian and speaking to Chicago police, but they had to wait until, tests were done to confirm that this was Gail before giving, an official statement. But before it was even, officially confirmed to the public that this was Gail, it was sort of leaked that this was Gail because a source in the police department told the media that a family member of Gail's had sort of confirm that it was her. They were able to visually, in a way, identify her body because there was a scar on the back of the torso of the body found in the water. And Gail, had a similar scar on her back, which is how they were able to identify it. And we knew, we didn't know. I wasn't there in real time, but the residents there knew that in addition to somebody coming out and leaking that this might have been Gail, they knew that somebody had been taken into custody, but they didn't know who. They knew a car had been towed, but they didn't know whose car. And they knew that a cadaver dog had made a hit on someone's vehicle, but they didn't have the specifics of who all this stuff belonged to, but they were like, this is looking a little bit suspicious. Because it's you have all of these things, and we know all of these things, but no charges have been filed, and the body hasn't been positively identified. So it seems like maybe you know something that you're not telling us, was the vibe that I got from what I was reading. But because this body was found, the searches for Gail were called off that Saturday afternoon, which was the day the body was found. Well, not all the searches, the public searches were called off. The police still said that they were going to be looking in specific areas and asked that, anyone in the public that had any information could come forward, but they kind of thanked the volunteers who had been searching and sent them on their way. Which I think definitely let people know, in addition to all that other stuff, that it was Gail, especially because this was kind of confirmed just a couple days later when on October 30th, the police came out and made a statement that was basically saying that Gail's missing persons investigation was now a criminal investigation, saying specifically of this, and I quote, "Gail Peck's disappearance may not have occurred as reported." And this is because they kind of knew by this time that foul play was involved. They were able to determine that no one but Brian had seen Gail in a while. The last time anybody had seen her was Tuesday the 24th. She had been out at a restaurant and she had seen and talked to a friend then. But since then, nobody had seen her. It was just Brian saying that days later, she disappeared while walking the dog. And they figured that that was bullshit and that Brian was involved in her murder. And let me tell you why they thought that. So after Brian reported Gail missing, they got a search warrant for the house. They being police got a search warrant for the house. So they go, they block off the street, they put police tape, they go in and they start searching. Like one does when they have a search warrant. And bro, when I tell you, they found blood. They found lots of blood. They found a giant blood stain on the floor, of the carpet in Gail's room, and some carpet cleaner next to it. And when a piece of that carpet was removed for testing purposes and all that jazz, they were able to see that there had been so much blood that it had soaked all the way into the wood floor, had gone down, and was coming through the tiles on the ceiling of the basement. There was that much blood. Additionally, they found blood on the lower portion of an armchair in her room, on a table, on the guest bathroom sink, on the first floor on the guest bathroom sink that was down there, and on the underside of a Bissell steam cleaner that police determined had just been purchased. When police searched the home, they also found a red towel that was identical to a red towel that was actually found in the suitcase that had contained some of Gail's remains that was found a little bit later. You remember the 2 duffel bags were found and then a suitcase was found? Well, there was a red towel in that suitcase that matched one inside the house. And when a dog, a police dog, a cadaver dog, a very good boy was doing their job around the house, seeing if they could smell any human remains, they alerted to the trunk of Gail's car. So it was looking like Gail's body might have been transported in the back of her own car. Now it's safe to say that several boxes of evidence were taken from this home. A home that they had literally just moved into. I think they lived there maybe 7 weeks, right? They had just gotten there. And despite being there only a short amount of time, apparently they made an impression because Gail made friends with everybody. As I said, she was a social butterfly. People really liked her. She met Sherry and became a surrogate mother in that short amount of time. But Brian seemed to rub people the wrong way, with one woman named Jessica, a neighbor, saying that he just wasn't the vibe. He wasn't given positive vibes. And she said specifically of him, quote, "I'd seen him a number of times walking around in the neighborhood. I can't really put my finger on why. He just made me a little uncomfortable." Anyways, they brought Brian to the station. Basically what happened is an officer went to his house, asked him if he wouldn't mind coming to the station to look at some stuff, answer some questions, and he said, sure, why not? So he gets there, and they sit him down, and they present some evidence for him. They're like, hey, look at this evidence that makes you look less than innocent, one may say. First, the blood. That's a big one. When the officers were like, so, why was there just like so much blood in your mom's bedroom? Which they probably didn't say it like that. They were probably just like, so we found blood in your mom's bedroom, and didn't let him know like how much they knew. He had an explanation for this. He said that Gail had been walking with a plate that had a muffin on it, a fork, and a knife. Because she's very fancy. She's a very fancy lady. And he says that she dropped all of this. And when she bent down to clean up the mess, she ended up falling onto the fork and the knife and cut her knee. That's how all that blood got there. In response, police were like, okay, that makes a ton of sense, definitely. But what about this? How can you explain these images we have of you? These still images that were taken from surveillance videos of you buying things like the suitcase your mother's body was found in, the duffel bags your mom's body was found in, the paver bricks you used to weigh the body down. Like, how can you explain all that? Please, I'm all ears. And then they showed him these images. They showed him these images of his own stupid face buying these incriminating items, and they showed him photos of the bags that had held his mom's body. And with that, he broke and confessed. Kinda. He made a full confession where he said that on the night of the 24th, October 24th, which actually would have been the early morning hours of October 25th, because it was at about 3:30 a.m., his mother, Gail, had called him on the phone. He was down in the basement. She was upstairs. She called him and asked him if he wouldn't mind coming to her bedroom. And he, obliged. He went upstairs. And he said when he got up there, his mom was pissed because he had been playing Jimi Hendrix at like top volume. Now, it could be argued that that is the only way, at top volume is the only way to listen to Jimi Hendrix, but it is 3:30 a.m. and you don't gotta be a dick, right? Right. Anyways, he says she was furious and told him to get out. He needed to get out of her house. And then she produced a military-style knife and advanced on him with this knife. Okay, this is what he's saying happened. He says in response to this, he swept her leg, like kicked her feet out from under her, and when she was on the ground, he stomped on her head and neck until she was dead. And I can only imagine being the officers that are sitting here listening to this, because this man was a big man. Okay, he was like 6'1", like 260 pounds, and Gail was 5'4", like 5 foot to 5'4", something in that range, and 140 pounds. So I can only imagine how scared she must have been. He told them that after he realized she was dead, he knew he needed to figure out what to do with the body. And like many cases we cover, he realized that, or he figured the best way, the easiest way to dispose of her body would be if it was deconstructed. So he took her to the guest bathroom, he put her in the bathtub, and he dismembered her body with a handsaw. He literally said, quote, "I put her in the bathtub and hacked her up." So after he took her apart, he put her body in various garbage bags and then took her down to the basement, with his initial plan being that he was just going to store her in the freezer in the home. So he started trying to make room for her, started hacking away at the freezer with a hatchet to like knock out shelves and, knock out old ice and like make room for her. But he ended up having to stop because he cut into the Freon and realized that this was not such a good idea. Because apparently, like, Freon is no good. It can be toxic. It can cause environmental damage. It's just all bad. You don't want to be cutting into Freon. It's not good for you. It's not good for anybody. So not knowing what to do next, because like his brilliant fridge idea was a bust, he just left the body, his mother's body, in garbage bags in the basement overnight. He said that Wednesday morning he had decided what to do, so he drove the bags containing his mother's head and arms to Montrose Harbor and threw them in Lake Michigan. Then the next day he purchased a 5-piece Protégé luggage set, duffel bags, and a Bissell steam cleaner at Walmart. He proceeded to put his mother's torso and legs into one of the suitcases and duffel bags filled with paver bricks, a towel, the saw he used, and then drove to Chicago, throwing them into the water near Diversey Harbor, Chicago's Lagoon Park. And this is where the fishermen later found the body that was confirmed by DNA to belong to Gail Peck. Which just goes to show that all of what he's saying seems to be true. And then he waited a couple days to report his mother missing and pretend that she went out to walk her dog and never came back. So at this, Brian Peck was arrested on October 31st, 2017, and he was charged with premeditated first-degree murder, and concealment of a homicide, all in relation to the murder of his own mother. And after he was arrested, more searches were conducted at the Lincoln Park Lagoon because not all of Gail had been recovered. And from what I know, from what I've read, to this day, not all of her body has been found. I believe her arms and her head are still missing. And because of this also, the medical examiner wasn't even able to conclusively name a cause of death because, I mean, her head was missing and she had been in the water for a while, so they can't even confirm or deny what exactly Brian said happened because he's saying it was her head and her neck, and you can't tell without having the head. Now, people were shocked to learn that Brian had did this to his mother. Gail's friend Sherry said that Brian had literally, quote, killed the only person who would ever love him. And though she said that she didn't understand how someone could value their mother so cheaply, she wasn't trying to understand because this wasn't the type of thing you could understand. Sometimes evil is just evil. And truly, it did seem like this guy was evil because this wasn't an isolated incident. Even though at trial, Brian tries to say that this was a murder that happened because of self-defense. He's saying that it was self-defense, which is laughable when you look at the situation and you look at the two people involved, but it's also laughable when you look at their history because it seems that Brian had a problem with keeping his fucking hands off of his mother. He was physically abusive to his elderly mother, which just pisses me the fuck off. I have a real problem with that. According to the records, Brian had a long criminal history, including 6 felony convictions for things like identity theft, aggravated battery, computer fraud, possession of a stolen motor vehicle, and theft by deception. And his mother, Gail, had filed for orders of protection against her son on more than one occasion. In one of these orders for protection that was filed in March of 2016, Gail said that she was afraid of her son, that she was afraid for her life. And if you've never seen one of these orders, which I hope you haven't, I hope most of you haven't. I know based on the comments on some videos that I've covered regarding domestic violence that some of you have, which is, incredibly heartbreaking. And anybody who's dealt with that, I'm personally so sorry that you've had to go through that. But there is an area in one of these like applications for the order where you have to write like why you want this, right? Why you are fearful. And in this, Gail wrote about an incident where her and her son were driving to a restaurant together. She was driving and he was intoxicated. And on the way to the restaurant, they started to talk, and she brought up the fact that Brian had been playing his music too loud, and this led to a giant fight. Sound familiar? She wrote specifically, quote, "He was playing the music too loud at home, so I told him, don't play it so loud in the house or the neighbors would complain. And he started yelling at me and calling me bad names." She added that in response, she told Brian that she was no longer going to take him to the restaurant and that she was heading home instead. And at this, he started to hit her and pull on her jacket. And she said that she threatened to call the police. And in response, she wrote, quote, "He took my cell phone and he opened the door and pretended to throw it out of the car. He hit me in the face and he scratched me on the face and I was bleeding." When she got home, Gail did call the police, and while they were on the phone, the police told him he needed to relax. He needed to calm down. But instead, he advanced on her. He charged at her, and he told her he was going to kill her. Gail said specifically of this, quote, "He came up behind me and put me in a chokehold and lifted me off the ground. He tried to snap my neck. When he finally let her go, she told him to get away, and he did. And once he left, she called the police again, and he did end up getting arrested for this. He ended up pleading guilty to domestic battery and was given 100 days in jail and given probation. And despite the fact that Gail went and visited him in jail and told him that he crossed the line when he got violent with her and that she didn't want him to be her son anymore. She never wanted to see or talk to him again. When he got out of jail, he ended up moving back into her house and living in her basement. And now he was arrested for killing her and ended up being held in jail without bond after the prosecution presented to the judge their evidence that this was an incredibly planned and premeditated murder of this woman, with the judge agreeing and calling him an extreme real and present threat. Which seemed to ring true because despite pleading not guilty and claiming that the whole thing happened in self-defense, which if that was true, you would think it would be a traumatizing thing that you had to do, and it would be really hard to deal with, and it would make you very emotional. Well, when his trial began in 2022, he was pretty emotionless through the entire thing. The prosecution had a pretty strong case. They were able to put together an entire timeline of events that happened in the days leading up to him reporting his mother missing and then her body being found. And it was just example after example of this guy trying and failing to cover his tracks. The prosecution told the court that on the morning he killed his mother at 5 a.m., so that would have been, if his story is true, an hour and a half after he killed her, he got in his mother's car because he didn't have his own car. He drove to like a drive-through ATM and pulled $500 out of his mother's account. And this was caught on surveillance cameras. He then headed to Walmart where he bought carpet cleaner and OxyClean, and this too was caught on surveillance cameras. And the prosecutor said of this fact, quote, "He made her actually pay to buy products to clean up after her own murder." So he does that. He goes home, and just before 8 a.m., he calls the cleaning lady who had worked for his mother for years, and he told her not to come. And this was weird. This was already weird. This already gave little like red flags, like alarm bells in her head, because she told police that in all these years she had worked for Gail, Brian had never once called her and told her not to come on the morning of one of the days that she was going to come and clean the house. But anyways, that same afternoon, moving through the timeline, that same afternoon, he went to Home Depot. He bought pavers bricks. He bought 3 tarps. He bought nylon rope. And again, this is caught on camera. Then we move forward to the next afternoon. He goes back to Walmart again, and this time he buys the 5-piece Protégé luggage set. He buys the duffel bags, and he buys the Bissell like steam cleaner for the carpet. And this was caught on video, and police were able to actually go and retrieve the receipt from this purchase. Police were also able to determine that the suitcases and the duffel bags that he had purchased were matches for the ones that were containing portions of Gail's body when she was pulled out of the water. And the jury was even able to look at these items, to look at the suitcase and to look at the duffel bag that Brian had used to conceal his mother's body. And the remaining luggage, by the way, the remaining pieces of suitcases, the remaining luggage was in Gail's home. So they were able to be like, look, this 5-piece is missing a piece. There's that piece holding some of his mother's body. Anyways, police told the jury that on the Friday after Brian had murdered his mother, her niece, who loved her, who was very close with her, called because she wanted to talk to her aunt. And he told her that she couldn't talk to her right now because Gail was in bed, quote, sick as a dog. Then that afternoon, that Friday afternoon, he stole more of Gail's money, transferring $4,000 from her savings account. He went to Walgreens and he bought some Drano. And then finally that afternoon at about 3:30 p.m., he called the police to report that his mother had gone out to walk the dog and had never returned. When in actuality, she had been killed days earlier. And during that time between killing her and reporting her missing, he had made several trips to go and dump off different parts of her body in water like actual trash, and his movements were caught on iPass. They could literally see him coming and going from those locations. The prosecutor said to the court of this murder, and I quote, "Make no mistake, Brian Peck is guilty of murder." Now Brian, he disagreed. Okay, he said that he did not murder his mother, and instead she had, quote, "died accidentally after she attacked me with a knife." Which, is pretty consistent with the initial confession he had given to police. But the departure here was in his reasoning for the whole thing happening, where before he said he and his mother had gotten in a fight because she was upset at the decibel level of him playing his Jimi Hendrix music. Now he was saying that the argument was about money. Basically what he said is that he was trying to get federal benefits for being the caretaker for his mother, right? This is his story. He was trying to get federal benefits, and he was trying to get a cool $180,000. And he says that that night he had talked to his mother about this, and he told her that he wasn't going to share that he wasn't going to share this money with his mother, and that as a response to this, she, quote, went ballistic. He said that he tried to calm his mother down the best he could, and he told her, like, listen, the reason I can't share it with you is because I need this money to go towards my debt collection business. And he said she was super pissed, and when he said he wasn't going to share this money with her and was going to keep it for himself, she said to him, quote, "Then what the fuck do I need you for?" before charging at him with a knife trying to stab him. He said that he sidestepped her and was able to knock her feet out from under her. And once he had her on the ground, he took his foot and he put it on her head just to hold her down. But he said in response, she took the knife and she stabbed him in the shin. So he moved his foot from her head to her neck and pressed down until she relented. But really, he pressed down until she was dead. This fool literally testified for 4 hours about his innocence and about how he was just defending himself from his tiny little 140-pound, 76-year-old mother. But he said once she was dead, he panicked and that he even tried to save her. He tried to perform CPR because he had seen it done on TV like a million times, but it was unsuccessful, so he was freaking out. He didn't think police were going to believe that this was self-defense. So in response to this, in response to thinking people wouldn't believe that it was self-defense, he cut up his mother's body so he could hide it because he was scared that he was going to get convicted for something he didn't mean to do, with his attorney saying, quote, "The fear of going to jail was incredible for Brian." His attorney said Brian wasn't thinking, he was reacting. But the prosecution thought this was kind of bullshit and said to the juries of this thought process of his, quote, "What reasonable person butchers their own mother because they're afraid of what the police might think?" They then added that Brian would do anything possible to get out from under the mountain of evidence that the prosecution had against him, and said that he was cool, calm, and collected while telling lies over and over and over. They said everyone he talked to, he lied to. He told her friends, family, the cleaning lady she was sick. He reported her missing, and the only time he changed his story when he was presented with evidence because he had no choice, that he was just a liar. Now, after a week-long trial, the jury was sent to deliberate, and though the prosecution was going after a first-degree murder conviction because that's what they believed he deserved, the jury also had the option of finding him guilty of second-degree murder, or I believe involuntary or voluntary manslaughter. Involuntary manslaughter. Now, you remember how Brian Peck got on the stand and defended himself for literally 4 hours? Well, it took the jury about half that time to come up with their decision. After just a little more than 2 hours, they had come back and they had decided that Brian Peck was guilty of all the charges against him. He was guilty of first-degree murder. He was guilty of dismembering his mother's body and trying to hide that he had murdered her. When the verdict was read, he had little reaction, but a group of Gail's friends who had been watching the trial, I don't know why this is, because this was 2022, so like COVID protocols had chilled a bit, but a group of Gail's friends were watching the trial via Zoom in like a basement viewing room, which I thought was odd. But when the verdict was announced, they cheered and cried and hugged each other. So now Brian was just going to be sentenced, and he was facing up to 100 years in prison, but ultimately it would be up to a judge to decide how long he would serve. Now, Brian did try to advocate for himself, saying to the judge, quote, "I loved my mom with all my heart and soul." A statement that made several detectives like turn their heads away in either, disagreement or disgust. I couldn't say for sure because I wasn't there to ask them, but they were definitely like not down with his sickness. He also told the judge that, he had a lot that he could still contribute to the community. Being a smart man as he was and an inventor of sorts, he told the judge about this long-range hybrid jet engine he made, and he also told the judge about a gravity bomb he made that was capable of creating small black holes. And he said that this was his greatest invention, which to me sounds absolutely terrifying. Like, people like him shouldn't be able to make things like that. You know what I'm saying? It's like when Sarah Connor says, like, guys like you created the atomic bomb. I'm not saying he's as smart as Mr. Dyson. Let's get one thing straight here. But anyways, the judge was not having it, and he asked Brian the rhetorical question, quote, "What kind of human being can look at their mother and dismember her body like that?" And then the judge added that there was basically nothing worse than what Brian had done. The judge then said that Brian had, quote, "irretrievable depravity," and said his testimony was just to try and justify the unjustifiable, and that he had no emotion when he testified how he cut his mother into pieces and then, quote, "gave her a burial in her suitcase coffin." He then sentenced Brian Peck to 50 years for the first-degree murder charge, 20 years for the dismembering of her body, and 5 years for the concealment. The last 2 terms were ordered to be served at half length, which is something I'm not super familiar with, but basically what it comes down to is that he will serve a minimum of 62.5 years in prison, minus the 1,648 days that he had already spent in jail, which is about 4 years, which means at his age, this is basically a death sentence, because by this time he was 60. To which I say, bye. You know what I mean? Like, he should be in jail. Like, he's 60 years old, and even if he's not put to death, like, he has to spend the rest of his years in jail. And I think that sometimes I think that's better than the death sentence. You know what I mean? I guess it's a case-by-case basis for me, for sure. But I feel like just by looking at photos of him, he seemed like the type of guy who liked a certain type of lifestyle. And it definitely wasn't the lifestyle he's going to have for the rest of his life, I'll tell you that. Now, I wish I could say that that was the last that we're going to talk about Brian, but unfortunately it is not, because he can't stop, won't stop coming around bitch, basically is what it comes down to. So in 2022, which would have been like right after he was convicted, he actually filed a lawsuit against not the Elgin Police Department, but specifically 2 Elgin detectives. This was Heather Robinson and Anthony Reggiano, I think is how you say it. He basically said that Officer Robinson had violated his rights against self-incrimination when she didn't allow him to speak to an attorney and coerced his confession. And he said that Reggiano had sat by, watched this, and did nothing to stop it. Now, the detectives disagreed and obviously moved to have this lawsuit dismissed. So basically what happened here is on October 27th, after he reported his mother missing, Heather Robinson had gone to his house, Brian's house, and I've been like, hey, would you please come to the police station so you could look at these aerial maps of, areas we're looking for your mother, blah, 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 answer some questions. And he agreed. Once he was there, they read him his Miranda rights, or Heather read him his Miranda rights, and then started to question him about his mother's disappearance, while Anthony Reggiano, Rigano, Reggiano, watched in like another room. The questioning went on for 3 hours, and at the end of it, he asked if he could leave, and they told him no, so he spent the night in a jail cell. The next day, when the questioning started again, he was Mirandized again, but this time pretty immediately, he asked for an attorney, and he asked to speak to his family, and Heather Robinson told him no, which is not good, because you gotta let people have their attorneys, right? Even if you think they're pieces of shit, they're entitled to attorneys, because if you don't, it's a slippery slope where people who aren't like murdering pieces of shit are being denied their attorneys. So anyways, he was there for 78 hours, reportedly total, wasn't given an attorney, and ended up confessing and was charged with his mother's murder. Basically, he was trying to sue them because he believed that his confession was coerced due to them not letting him have his attorney, and that affected his trial. Although the detectives argued that this did not matter because the incriminating statements he made weren't even used at trial, because Brian had filed a motion to have his obsession, what is the word? Suppressed. To have his confession suppressed, and the judge had agreed, which I didn't even mention, but like his confession wasn't used at trial. So basically what this came down to is the lawsuit wasn't successful completely. He's not able to sue them on the Miranda violation specifically, but he is able to move forward with trying to sue them on the coerced confession situation. But I haven't seen any update on this, and he's not trying to appeal because of it, but I just felt like it was worth mentioning because like he is a man that simply won't quit. But also it seems like perhaps in this instance he has a point. So it sounds like he might end up getting some money out of this, but I am happy to see that it doesn't look like he's going to get out of jail on a technicality, because what he did was so brutal and horrible. And to your own mother, to have the person you birthed and raised and loved and lived with till your final years, like your golden years, and to have that baby that you just watched grow and celebrated all their first, to have them grow up to mistreat you and abuse you and then murder you, cut your body into pieces and throw you away like trash. That is a fate too horrible for me to even be able to put myself in. It's unimaginable, and I feel so bad for her. But with that, my friends, is the story of the horrible murder of Gail Peck. I hope you found my telling of this to be informative, and I hope it made sense. And of course, I just want to thank you for hanging out and remembering Gail with me today. Now, considering everything I told you throughout this video, I want to revisit the question of the day, and that was this. What do you believe was the real reason that these two fought and he ended up murdering his mother? Do you at all buy that it was in any way self-defense? Do you think it was about the music? Could it really be about the music? I mean, he had gotten rageful at the same kind of argument before. Maybe if he had been drinking, that would be the case. Or do you think it was money related? Like, what do you think made him do what he did? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below, because I don't see how somebody could do something like this. But anyways, guys, before you leave, please don't forget to leave me a comment down below with what case you'd like to see me cover in the future. As you know, I have a long list of cases. Whenever you leave me a suggestion, I put it on the list with your name next to it, so if I do cover it, I can give you a shout out. I love looking into the cases you guys suggest, because they're often cases I haven't heard of or cases that need more coverage, and I know you're filled with great ideas and great taste, otherwise you would not be here. If you haven't already, please don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing the bell. I put out new videos every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us. One of us. One of us. And if you want to hang out more consistently, all my social media is listed down below, along with a link to my membership and a link to my merch store. And now with all of that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. Please stay safe and be a better person than you were yesterday, and I hope to see you in my next video.